She entered the ballroom behind her sister, until the Duke crossed the floor to take her hand. The chandeliers cast their golden light upon the polished marble of Bridgerton Hall, illuminating the most anticipated event of the season. Ladies in silk and gentlemen in tailored coats filled the grand ballroom, their whispers like leaves rustling in an autumn breeze. At the entrance stood the Lisborne sisters, Silistra radiant in golden silk that captured every ray of gaslight, and behind her, Marielle, clothed in modest pearl grey, nearly invisible in her sister's shadow. "The Lisborne girls have arrived," someone murmured, though all eyes fixed solely upon Silistra, whose golden curls bounced with each graceful step. The younger sister's dance card already overflowed with names of eager suitors before she had even crossed the threshold. Marielle's gloved fingers clutched her own empty dance card, a small rectangle of cream-colored paper that would likely remain pristine throughout the evening. She had grown accustomed to standing against the wall, watching others twirl beneath the crystal chandeliers, their laughter drowning out her silence. At 24, she was considered a fixture of the wallflower garden, while Silistra, at 21, bloomed in the center of every gathering. "Remember your place," Lady Ruth Lisborne had instructed earlier that evening, adjusting Marielle's simple pearl hairpin. "Your sister must secure a match this season. Our family's future depends upon it." "Yes, Mother," Marielle had replied, the words worn smooth from years of repetition. Now, as they entered the ballroom, Lady Ruth guided Silistra forward with a firm hand at her back, leaving Marielle to follow dutifully behind. The crowd parted for the Golden Sister, but closed again before Marielle could pass, forcing her to navigate her own path through the sea of silk and cologne. "Miss Silistra grows more exquisite each season," declared Lady Pembroke to her circle of confidants. "A true English rose." "And the elder one?" someone whispered. "Oh, Miss Marielle, a good enough girl, I suppose. Dutiful, unremarkable." The fans fluttered in agreement, their painted scenes hiding smirking lips. Marielle pretended not to hear as she made her way toward the refreshment table, seeking refuge in its shadow. She had long ago learned that invisibility could be a sanctuary of sorts. A hush suddenly fell over the assembly. The orchestra, which had been playing a lively country dance, faltered, then ceased entirely. Marielle looked up from her untouched glass of lemonade to see what had caused such a dramatic interruption. The Duke of Halveth stood at the top of the grand staircase. His tall figure commanded attention without effort, his posture that of a man who knew his own worth without needing to declare it. Dark hair, touched by a hint of silver at the temples, framed a face more handsome for its character than its features. His eyes, amber in the candlelight, surveyed the room with quiet intensity. "His Grace, the Duke of Halveth," announced the footman, though the introduction was hardly necessary. The ton held its collective breath. The Duke's presence at a ball was rare enough to be remarkable. His appearance at the Bridgerton affair was nothing short of extraordinary. At 32, he remained unmarried, despite being one of England's most eligible bachelors. Rumour attributed his continued bachelorhood to everything from a secret foreign mistress to a mysterious vow made on his father's deathbed. Lady Ruth immediately straightened Silistra's already perfect curls. "Stand tall, my dear. The Duke is watching." Indeed, the Duke's gaze swept across the room, but it did not settle on Silistra's golden beauty. Instead, it moved methodically, as if searching for something, or someone, specific. When he began his descent down the staircase, the crowd instinctively drew back, creating a path from the steps to the center of the ballroom. Lady Ruth maneuvered Silistra into his potential line of vision, arranging her daughter's features into a mask of demure welcome. The Duke, however, did not stop. He continued his purposeful stride across the polished floor, acknowledging greetings with the barest of nods. The ton's whispers grew more urgent, speculating about his destination and intention. "He makes for the Remington girl," guessed one matron. "No, surely it is Lady Elizabeth he seeks," countered another. Yet the Duke passed them all. His steady gait carried him through the parting crowd, his bearing regal and determined. And then, to the astonishment of every witness, he stopped directly before the modest figure in pearl grey. Marielle nearly dropped her lemonade when she realized the Duke of Halveth stood before her, his amber eyes focused entirely on her face. "Miss Lisborne," he said, his voice deep and clear enough to carry to the nearby onlookers, "may I have the honor of this dance?" The room fell utterly silent. Even the musicians seemed to hold their breath, their instruments poised in anticipation. Marielle's heart hammered against her ribs. Surely there had been some mistake. Perhaps he had mistaken her for someone else, someone worthy of such attention. "Your Grace," she managed, her voice barely audible. "I fear you may have mistaken me for my sister, Miss Silistra Lisbourne." A hint of a smile touched the Duke's lips. "I assure you, Miss Mariel Lisbourne, I have made no mistake. It is your hand I request for this dance." And then he extended his gloved hand toward her, palm up in invitation, a gesture that in the rigid language of the Tun could only be interpreted as deliberate choice. Across the room, Lady Ruth's face drained of all color, and Silistra's perfect mouth formed a small surprised O. The Tun collectively gasped, fans stilling mid-flutter, for the Duke of Halveth had not merely asked Mariel Lisbourne to dance, he had crossed the entire ballroom floor, before all of society, to claim her as his chosen partner. The gaslight seemed to flicker as Mariel placed her trembling hand in the Duke's steady palm. His fingers closed gently around hers, a gesture at once formal and intimate, observed by hundreds of calculating eyes. The orchestra, sensing its cue, stirred to life with the opening notes of a waltz. "I believe you know the steps, Miss Lisbourne?" the Duke inquired, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "Yes, Your Grace," Mariel replied, though in truth she had rarely performed them. Few gentlemen had ever requested her hand for a dance, let alone for the first waltz of the evening, a position of highest honor. He guided her to the center of the floor, the crowd parting before them like water around stones. Lady Ruth's face remained frozen in disbelief, while Silistra's perfect features betrayed confusion rather than malice. As they took their positions, his hand at her waist, hers upon his shoulder, the Duke's amber eyes held a spark of something Mariel could not quite name. "The Tun will talk," she whispered, as they began to move in time with the music. "Let them," he replied simply. "The Tun speaks regardless of merit or truth." They moved together with surprising grace, as if they had danced this dance 100 times before. Mariel felt herself becoming lighter with each turn, the weight of years spent in shadows temporarily lifted by the strange alchemy of the moment. "You dance remarkably well for a lady who seldom takes the floor," observed the Duke. "My father insisted we both learn properly," she answered, "though I confess I have had little opportunity to practice outside our drawing room, a lamentable oversight on the part of every gentleman in this room." The compliment, so direct, so matter-of-fact, brought warmth to Mariel's cheeks. "You are too kind, Your Grace." "No, Miss Lisbourne, I merely state what is evident." His gaze remained steady upon her face as if memorizing its contours. Kindness implies charity. There is no charity in acknowledging merit where it genuinely exists. By now other couples had joined them on the floor, though a respectful distance was maintained around the Duke and his unexpected partner. The initial shock had transformed into fervent whispers behind fans and gloved hands. "May I inquire as to what brings Your Grace to Veridane Hall this evening?" Mariel asked, seeking safer conversational ground. "I understood you rarely attend such gatherings." "I came with purpose," he replied, guiding her through a graceful turn. "And that purpose is now fulfilled." Before she could question his cryptic response, the dance concluded. The Duke escorted her from the floor with proper decorum, though his hand remained firmly clasping hers, another deviation from the usual etiquette, where a gentleman would merely offer his arm. He led her not to the wallflower section where she typically stood, but to a small alcove adorned with winter roses, somewhat removed from the main crush, but still within proper public view. "Miss Lisbourne," he said, his voice carrying a note of resolution, "I hope you will permit me to call upon you tomorrow." Mariel blinked in surprise. A request to call was tantamount to declaring serious interest, something utterly outside her experience. "Yes, of course, Your Grace, though I confess I am at a loss to understand why. Because in a room full of rehearsed smiles and calculated charms, your genuine spirit shines like a beacon to those with eyes to see it." His words, though formal, carried a warmth that reached beyond mere courtesy. Before she could formulate a response, Lady Ruth materialized at her side, her composure partially restored behind a rigid smile. "Your Grace," she said, executing a perfect curtsy. "What an unexpected honor you bestow upon our Mariel. I trust she has not monopolized your valuable time?" "On the contrary, Lady Lisbourne," the Duke replied coolly. "It is I who have claimed your daughter's attention, and I shall do so again tomorrow with your permission. I wish to call upon Miss Mariel at 2 o'clock. Lady Ruth's smile faltered only momentarily. "We should be delighted, Your Grace. Our humble home is honored by your interest. The honor is entirely mine." He bowed over Mariel's hand, his lips brushing against her gloved knuckles, in a gesture that, while perfectly proper, seemed to carry additional significance. "Until tomorrow, Miss Lisbourne." With that he withdrew, leaving Marielle at the mercy of her mother's bewildered scrutiny. "What have you done?" Lady Ruth hissed, her smile never wavering for the benefit of onlookers. "Nothing, mother," Marielle replied truthfully. "His Grace approached me of his own accord." "This is most irregular," Lady Ruth muttered, guiding Marielle firmly back toward where Silistra stood surrounded by her usual admirers, though their attention had notably diminished following the Duke's dramatic display. "The Duke of Halveth has never shown interest in any young lady of the ton, let alone—" She stopped herself, but Marielle heard the unspoken end of the sentence. "Let alone someone like you." For the remainder of the evening, Marielle found herself the subject of unprecedented attention. Gentlemen who had previously looked through her now requested dances. Ladies who had dismissed her with perfunctory nods now sought her conversation. Through it all, she felt the Duke's occasional gaze from across the room steady and inscrutable. When the Lisbon carriage finally conveyed them home in the early hours of the morning, Lady Ruth maintained a tense silence, broken only when they entered the privacy of their drawing-room. "I cannot fathom what game the Duke plays," she declared, pacing before the dying fire. "But we shall use it to our advantage. Silistra, you must be especially charming tomorrow when he calls. Perhaps he merely wished to distinguish himself through the unexpected. Men of his station often amuse themselves with such gestures." "Yes, mother," Silistra replied dutifully, though she cast a curious glance at her sister. "And you, Marielle," Lady Ruth continued, fixing her elder daughter with a stern gaze, "you will be properly grateful for His Grace's attention, but you must direct the conversation toward your sister's accomplishments at every opportunity." Marielle nodded silently, unwilling to argue, yet unable to promise compliance. For the first time in her life she had been seen, truly seen, and the sensation was too precious to willingly surrender. Later, in the sanctuary of her bedchamber, she stood before her mirror, studying the face that had somehow captured a duke's attention. The same grey eyes, the same unremarkable features she had always possessed, gazed back at her. What had he seen that no one else had bothered to look for? As she unpinned her hair, a single thought nestled in her heart like a small flame. Tomorrow, he would cross her threshold as deliberately as he had crossed the ballroom floor. And in that moment, as the last pin fell and her dark hair cascaded over her shoulders, Marielle Lisbon allowed herself to hope. The Lisbon drawing-room had never looked more immaculate. Lady Ruth had roused the servants at dawn to polish every surface until it gleamed, to arrange fresh flowers, despite the winter season's scarcity, and to prepare refreshments worthy of a ducal palate. By 1 o'clock, the modest but respectable chamber stood ready, as did the Lisbon ladies themselves. Silistra occupied the seat by the window, where the pale January light illuminated her golden curls to their best advantage. Lady Ruth had positioned herself near the door, prepared to greet their distinguished visitor with appropriate deference, and Marielle, contrary to her mother's wishes, had settled herself by the pianoforte, fingers absently tracing the keys without producing sound. "Remember, Marielle," Lady Ruth whispered urgently, "modesty becomes a woman who has received unexpected attention. Do not presume upon His Grace's interest." Before Marielle could respond, the distinct sound of carriage wheels on gravel announced their visitor's arrival. Lady Ruth's back straightened further, if such a thing were possible, and Silistra arranged her features into a mask of demure welcome. The butler's formal announcement, "His Grace the Duke of Halveth," sent a tremor through Marielle's fingers against the ivory keys. She rose along with her mother and sister, eyes downcast in proper deference. When she finally allowed herself to look up, she found the Duke's amber gaze already fixed upon her, bypassing both Lady Ruth's practiced curtsy and Silistra's perfect posture. He bowed with precise, elegant economy. "Lady Lisbon, Miss Marielle," he said, addressing each in turn, though his eyes lingered on Marielle. "I trust I find you well this afternoon?" "Exceedingly well, Your Grace," Lady Ruth replied, gesturing toward the best chair. "We are most honored by your presence in our humble home." "The honor is mine," he replied smoothly, accepting the seat but directing his attention to where Marielle had resumed her place by the pianoforte. "I understand you play, Miss Marielle." Before she could answer, Lady Ruth intervened. "Silistra is our accomplished musician, Your Grace. Her rendition of Mozart would delight you, I'm certain." "Silistra, dear, perhaps you might favor His Grace with a demonstration." Silistra rose obediently, moving toward the instrument with practiced grace. The Duke, however, remained focused on Marielle. "While I'm sure Miss Silistra plays beautifully, I asked specifically about Miss Marielle's abilities," he said, his tone perfectly polite, yet brooking no contradiction. "Perhaps another time, Miss Silistra." Lady Ruth's smile faltered only momentarily. "Mariel has some modest skill, though she lacks her sister's natural talent. Silistra has studied with Maestro Farrington himself." "I should like to hear Miss Mariel play nonetheless," the Duke insisted quietly. Mariel felt the weight of expectation settle upon her shoulders. She had indeed studied music, though with less fanfare than her sister. While Silistra performed with technical precision, Mariel played from a deeper well of feeling, something their various instructors had alternately praised or dismissed. "If it pleases your grace," she said, taking her place on the bench, "though I fear Mother speaks truly of my limitations." Her fingers trembled slightly as she began a piece by Chopin, not the showiest selection, but one that allowed the player's emotion to breathe through the notes. She played without the mechanical perfection of her sister, but with a sensitivity that transformed the drawing room into something larger, more profound. When the final note faded, she turned to find the Duke watching her with undisguised admiration. "You play as you dance, Miss Mariel," he observed, "with genuine feeling rather than mere technical execution." "Mariel has always been overly sentimental in her interpretations," Lady Ruth interjected, casting a warning glance at her elder daughter. "Silistra, however, maintains perfect fidelity to the composer's intentions." The Duke's mouth tightened almost imperceptibly. "I believe music, like life itself, benefits from both adherence to form and the courage to infuse it with one's own spirit." He turned to face Lady Ruth directly. "Lady Lisbourne, I wonder if I might walk in your garden with Miss Mariel. The day is fair for January, and I believe fresh air would be welcome." Lady Ruth hesitated, clearly torn between propriety and the unprecedented opportunity of a Duke's interest in her family. "Well, of course, with proper chaperonage. Silistra shall accompany you both." "I intended to request a private audience with Miss Mariel," the Duke replied firmly. "Though naturally we shall remain in full view of the house at all times, in accordance with propriety." The silence that followed stretched taut as piano wire. Lady Ruth's face betrayed the rapid calculations occurring behind her composed facade. "As you wish, Your Grace," she finally conceded. "Mariel, fetch your wrap, the blue one," she added pointedly, directing her towards Silistra's more fashionable cloak rather than Mariel's worn grey one. Moments later, Mariel found herself walking alongside the Duke in the winter garden. Frost outlined each dormant branch and hedge with silver, creating a landscape of suspended possibility. They remained in sight of the drawing-room windows, where Lady Ruth's vigilant silhouette could be discerned watching their progress. "You must be curious about my intentions, Miss Lisbourne," the Duke said without preamble. "I confess I am, Your Grace," Mariel replied candidly. "I cannot account for your attention when so many more worthy recipients grace our social circles." He stopped walking, turning to face her fully. "Worth, Miss Lisbourne, is rarely determined accurately by social consensus. I have observed you for some time, your kindness to those whom others neglect, your genuine interest in conversation beyond shallow pleasantries, your patience in circumstances that would embitter most souls." Mariel's pulse quickened. "You have watched me. At Lady Harrington's musical last month, at the Pemberton Gallery opening in November, at the Harvest Festival in Hampshire, where you spent the afternoon reading to the groundskeeper's blind grandmother while the rest of the party went riding. The fact that he had noticed her, had truly seen her when she believed herself invisible, was more intoxicating than any compliment about her appearance could have been." "Why did you wait until last night to approach me?" she asked. "Because last night I finally secured what I have spent 3 years pursuing, the restoration of my family's northern estate and the clearing of a debt that would have made any formal attachment on my part an act of selfishness." His amber eyes held hers steadily. "I could not honorably seek your hand until I had ensured I could offer security as well as affection." Mariel's breath caught. "My hand, Your Grace? Indeed, Miss Lisbourne, that is precisely what I intend to request, though perhaps not today. Today I merely wish to confirm that my regard is not unwelcome to you." For a moment Mariel could not speak, overwhelmed by the implications of his words. When she finally found her voice, it emerged softer than she intended. "Your regard is not unwelcome, Your Grace, though I can scarcely credit it. Then allow me to make myself perfectly clear." He took her gloved hand in his. "When I entered Veridane Hall last night, I did so with one purpose, to declare my interest in you before society could continue to overlook your worth. I crossed that floor deliberately, Miss Lisbourne, to ensure that no one could mistake my intentions or dismiss my choice." From the house came the sound of the drawing-room window being opened. "Mariel," Lady Ruth called, her voice carrying on the winter air. Perhaps you might show His Grace the conservatory. Silistra has just arranged the most charming display of winter blooms." The Duke's expression hardened momentarily before smoothing into polite neutrality. "Shall we disappoint your mother, Miss Lisbourne?" he asked quietly. Mariel hesitated only briefly before responding with unexpected firmness. "I believe we must, Your Grace. The conservatory lies in that direction, away from the house," and she deliberately led him toward the small stone bench near the frozen fountain, in full view of the drawing-room windows, but decidedly away from where her mother wished them to go. His smile, warm, genuine, appreciative, was worth whatever reprimand might await her later. They sat side by side, a proper distance between them, yet somehow more intimately connected than if they had been touching. "The winter ball at Halveth Manor occurs a fortnight from today," he said. "I should be honored if your family would attend as my personal guests." "Mother will be ecstatic," Mariel replied, unable to keep a hint of wryness from her tone. "And you, Miss Lisbourne? What emotions does my invitation stir in you?" She met his gaze directly. "Hope, Your Grace. An unfamiliar but not unwelcome sensation." "Hope," he echoed, "is precisely what I felt when I crossed the ballroom floor last night, not knowing if you would accept my hand." In the clarity of the winter light, with frost glittering around them like diamonds, something unspoken yet profound passed between them. A recognition, a promise, a beginning. And inside the house, watching from the window, Lady Ruth's calculating expression slowly transformed into reluctant resignation as she witnessed what could no longer be denied or redirected, the unmistakable connection between the Duke of Halveth and her overlooked elder daughter. The winter ball at Halveth Manor gleamed like a sapphire against the January night. Hundreds of candles illuminated the grand ballroom, their light reflecting off crystal and silver, transforming the ancient stone walls into a palace from some winter fairy tale. The Tun had turned out in full force, curiosity overcoming even the bitter cold that had settled over the countryside. For the Duke of Halveth, notorious for his avoidance of frivolous social gatherings, to host such a lavish event was unprecedented. Speculation ran rampant about his purpose. The Lisbourne carriage arrived precisely at 9 o'clock. Lady Ruth descended first, her face composed into an expression of dignified pleasure that belied the tumultuous fortnight she had endured, a fortnight in which the Duke had called upon Mariel no fewer than 6 times, each visit leaving her increasingly certain that her carefully laid plans for Silistra's ascension would never come to fruition. Silistra followed, lovely in pale blue silk that complemented her golden curls. Yet it was Mariel who drew gasps from those gathered in the entrance hall. She wore a gown of deep sapphire velvet, cut with an elegance that transformed her modest figure into something regal. Her dark hair had been arranged by the same maid who attended Silistra, but tonight no one had insisted she adopt a simpler style than her sister's elaborate coiffure. "Miss Mariel Lisbourne," announced the butler, his voice carrying through the marble hall with practiced precision. And then, breaking with all protocol, the Duke himself stepped forward to greet her, bypassing the receiving line of distinguished guests. "Miss Lisbourne," he said, taking her gloved hand in his, "you honor my home with your presence." The assembly watched in stunned silence as he escorted her personally into the ballroom, leaving Lady Ruth and Silistra to follow in their wake. Whispers erupted like a sudden rain shower behind them. "Did you hear? He called upon her every other day since the Veridane ball. Lady Pembroke claims he's commissioned a portrait of her from Signor Castellani. Her, not the beautiful sister. How extraordinary." The Duke led Mariel directly to the center of the ballroom, where the orchestra awaited the signal to begin the first dance. He turned to face the assembled guests, his hand still clasping hers. "Friends," he addressed the gathering, his voice clear and commanding, "I thank you for your presence this evening. As some may have observed, this ball represents a departure from my usual habits." A ripple of polite laughter acknowledged this understatement. "There is, as you might suspect, a purpose behind this aberration." His amber eyes turned to Mariel, warm with an emotion that needed no naming. 2 fortnights passed. I crossed a ballroom floor to claim a dance with a lady whose quiet worth had captured my attention and admiration. Tonight, before you all, I wish to claim something far more precious. The assembly fell utterly silent as he took both of Mariel's hands in his. "Miss Mariel Lisbourne," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the hushed room, "before these witnesses, I ask for your hand in marriage. Would you do me the profound honor of becoming my Duchess?" Mariel's heart seemed to stop, then race forward with doubled speed. Though they had spoken increasingly openly of affection during his visits, she had not expected a public declaration, particularly one of such magnificent scale. "Your Grace," she replied, her voice steady despite the emotion that threatened to overwhelm her. "You crossed a ballroom to find me when I believed myself invisible. I would cross the world to stand by your side as your wife." A murmur of approval rippled through the assembly, followed by spontaneous applause. The Duke raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles with such reverence that several ladies were observed to dab discreetly at their eyes. Lady Ruth, watching from the edge of the crowd, displayed an expression that blended resignation with growing calculation. For a duchess in the family, even if not the one she had groomed for the role, was no small achievement. Celistra, to her credit, appeared genuinely pleased for her sister. The weight of expectation that had burdened her own shoulders seemed to lift visibly, allowing her natural warmth to shine through the polished facade their mother had constructed. "The first dance," announced the Duke, nodding to the orchestra, "belongs, as always, to my future bride." As the music began, he guided Marielle into the opening steps of the waltz. They moved together with the grace of those who understand each other's rhythms instinctively, their eyes rarely leaving one another's faces. "Are you pleased, my love?" he asked, his voice pitched for her ears alone. "Beyond words," she replied, "though I confess to some astonishment at the public nature of your proposal. I wish to ensure that no one, not the Tun, not your mother, not even you yourself, could doubt the sincerity and permanence of my choice." His hand at her waist drew her a fraction closer than strict propriety might allow. "I crossed that first ballroom floor to declare my interest. I crossed tonight's to proclaim my devotion, and I shall, if necessary, cross 1,000 more to prove my heart belongs entirely to you." As they turned beneath the crystal chandeliers, other couples gradually joined them on the dance floor. Yet even in the midst of the growing crowd, they moved in a space that seemed set apart, a private world created by shared understanding and mutual recognition. Later, as the evening progressed toward midnight, the Duke led Marielle onto the terrace, where the winter stars shone with cold brilliance above the snow-covered gardens. A footman discreetly placed warmed cloaks around their shoulders before withdrawing to a respectful distance. "I have something for you," the Duke said, reaching into his coat pocket. He withdrew a small velvet box, opening it to reveal a ring unlike any Marielle had seen, not the traditional diamond, but a deep blue sapphire surrounded by smaller diamonds that sparkled like frost. "This belonged to my grandmother," he explained, "a woman of remarkable character who married for love in an age when such choices were even rarer than they are today. She made me promise I would give it only to a woman who had captured my heart as completely as she had captured my grandfather's." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Marielle felt the weight of happy tears behind her eyes. "I shall strive to be worthy of both the ring and the man who bestows it," she said softly. "You have been worthy since the moment I first saw you," he replied. "When you entered that ballroom behind your sister, thinking yourself unseen, I saw you more clearly than I have ever seen anyone in my life." Above them, the winter sky spread its canopy of stars. Behind them, through the terrace doors, the ball continued, music and laughter and the intricate dance of society carrying on as it had for centuries. But in this moment, on this snow-dusted terrace, something new had been created. A love born not from convenience or calculation, but from the revolutionary act of truly seeing another soul. The Duke raised Marielle's hand to his lips once more, his breath warm against her skin. "When the world sees only what is placed at the forefront," he murmured, "the discerning heart recognizes what truly matters, even if it walks a step behind." And as he drew her gently into his embrace, propriety tempered by genuine affection, Marielle Lisborne, soon to be the Duchess of Halveth, knew that she would never again enter any room unseen, unvalued, or unloved, for she had been recognized, chosen, and cherished by the one who had crossed the floor to take her hand. Dear listener, remember that sometimes the most beautiful stories unfold when someone sees what others overlook. True worth often hides behind modest facades, waiting for the discerning heart to recognize it. Just as the Duke crossed that ballroom to claim Marielle, may we all have the courage to seek out authentic connection rather than being dazzled by superficial charm. If this tale of love and recognition touched your heart, please share your thoughts in the comments below. Perhaps you've witnessed or experienced a moment when someone truly saw you when others did not. Your stories inspire us to create more of these cherished romances. Remember to subscribe for more tales of love that transcend society's narrow vision. Until our next journey together through the ballrooms and hearts of a bygone era, may you always recognize the true worth in those around you and in yourself.